Welcome everybody to this little session this afternoon, and I'm simply going to read because I can't get into the discussion of money. We have an expert on that, so I won't do that. But I'd like to introduce John Tomlinson. Some of you may not know John, but he published a book called Honest Money. And after the meeting, if you want to have a copy of this book, we'll make them available to anybody interested. Now, he says, following the failure of the Northern Rock Bank in the UK, John drafted a bill to legally change the banking system in the UK. Now, that's really big stuff. That's tackling the big stuff. The bill would have returned title to their money to depositors, thus prohibiting banks from using deposits without the consent of the depositors. Seems pretty good to me. I always thought I owned my money, but maybe we don't after all. Anyway, this bill, introduced in the House of Lords on January the 30th in 2008 by the Earl of Caithness, had its second reading on April 25th, 2008, and then gathered dust. Had it been passed, it would have seriously reduced the effects of the bank collapse in the UK. It would have removed all risk and moral hazard from deposits. The bill expired at the end of the last Parliament. Undeterred, Mr. Tomlinson, who tells me he's been doing this since 1974, he's taken a serious interest in this question of honest and dishonest money. That's a long time to be working on this. But anyway, he submitted a testimony to a new independent commission on banking set up by Prime Minister David Cameron in the United Kingdom. At the same time, Douglas Carswell, MP, has tabled a bill in the House of Commons also to return title to depositors. Caswell argues from the point of contract law. Anyway, Mr. Tomlinson is a former stockbroker from Thompson McKinnon and a merchant banker with Ord BT in Sydney, Australia, used to run Union Dock in Nassau, and is well known by many of the older generation. There are nobody here.
Nobody by five.
His family.
You should have invited some friends.
John, some of us still look young.
We all know there are lots of changes going on now on this issue of money, inflation, and all related aspects of that. But John, it's wonderful you to come and speak to our little group here. I know we're all going to learn something this afternoon. Thanks so much.
Being a permanent resident since 1963, I often say, fellow Bahamian. Cheeky, huh? Speaking of cheeky, my daughter always says to me, Daddy, don't worry, Moses didn't make it to the promised land either. But we fight on.
You saw it.
The subject today is how to protect the Bahamian banking system from the next World Bank collapse and to make it safe for future generations. And it's possible. Let's look at the current state of the world. We've got sovereign debt at unprecedented levels, governments unable or unwilling to deal with levels of expenditure, taxpayers in revolt, gold at an all-time high, and highly destructive natural disasters on the increase. So who knows what event is going to trigger the next collapse? We can only be confident that something will. When it does, we can also be confident that American banks will once more be found to be wanting. They remain holding massive levels of sovereign debt, massive levels of toxic mortgages still remain on their books, and a new avalanche of mortgages is heading in their direction at the moment. In Europe, Greece approaches another bailout. Portugal is receiving one, and other countries are on watch. The world is awash with debt, sovereign debt, corporate debt, personal debt. These are all at barely manageable levels. No banking system is currently risk-free. That includes the Bahamian banking system. It too, as currently structured, is subject to failure. It, along with Canada, managed to survive the downturn of the 2007 and 2008. But this next one is likely to be much larger and much more severe. Can we protect our bank deposits? Yes. That's why I'm here today. But before we attempt to look at the solutions, I'd like to briefly review the history of money and banking so that we may better understand what needs to be done. I think the solutions become more obvious when we understand clearly why we're doing something. I'm going to go into some very basic detail here to remind ourselves that God did not create money. Man did. Money is not some God-given, inexplicable entity over which we have no control. Man created money in response to having settled on the land and making himself dependent upon exchange. There are problems with money, and when we have them, we must sort them out ourselves. Now, from the moment we're born, we expend energy. We replenish it initially from our mother's breast, and then we replenish it through eating. And there's a relationship in nature between the energy we receive from what we eat and the energy we expend to find it. For instance, if we expend more energy in finding, picking, cleaning, biting, chewing, swallowing, and digesting an apple, all of which is our own energy expenditure, than we receive from the apple, we're not going to do it twice. When we were nomadic, we were free to pick an apple. But then we settled on the land. And with that came property rights and laws to protect property. And some people then owned the land, and others didn't. And those who didn't had no legal access to apples. They had to ask the owner of the land if they could pick one. And the owner of the land would then require you to pick one or two or three or whatever it is. If you came to me and you were hungry and you said, "Hey John, can I have an apple?" And my wife had been good to me that day, I might say, "Oh sure, go pick two and leave me one." If she hadn't, I might be grumpier than hell and say, "Yeah, go pick 100 and leave me 99. You don't have any choice because you're hungry. In both cases, the owner of the apples would have required the hungry person to expend more energy than nature intended. Either twice the energy or 100 times the energy. And viewed from that perspective, throughout the course of history, whenever those in control of the essentials for human survival have required those who are not in control to behave too unnaturally, just to survive, revolutions have occurred. The Tea Party in the U.S., by the way, an example of an early sign of that kind of revolution beginning now. But the most significant changes occur when a second person comes to me and says, "Hey John, can I have an apple?" I don't want that person to pick 2 or pick 100. I've already got some on my desk. And I say, "Sure, make me a chair and I'll give you an apple." And that's how we became the only species of which I'm aware that busies itself producing what it doesn't want in order to exchange that for what it does want. And if you think about it, it's in the process of producing what we don't want that we destroy the environment upon which we depend for our own survival. And we profess to be the most intelligent species on the surface of the earth. Do you know any other species that's quite that stupid? Think about it. The net result is that from the moment we settled on the land, we've all lived in a mandatory exchange society, within which we've had to exchange to survive. This is the change about which Henry George, the founder of Georgian economics,